The most dangerous power in this world is the power you never see coming. It starts in silence, in the soft hum of a late-night refrigerator, in the distant echo of a hallway where no one walks anymore, in the dim flicker of a streetlight outside a window you haven't opened in weeks. Silence has a way of sitting beside you like a shadow patient, unmoving, holding truths you were never ready to hear. And yet, this is where every successful person eventually learns to live, in the quiet, in the unseen, in the part of life where everyone else is too loud to notice what's really happening, because silence is a strategy, a shield, a weapon, a mirror, a psychological sanctuary built from years of pain, disappointment, and the heavy realization that not every battle deserves a response. You begin to understand this in the late hours of your life, when the world is quiet enough that you can finally hear your own thoughts again, when the noise of everyone else's expectations fades, when the people who claim to care stop performing their concern, when the toxic relationships, the manipulation, the guilt, tripping, the gaslighting, all reveal their true shapes in the shadows they cast on your inner world. And it hits you that most of the damage in your life didn't come from what people did. It came from what you allowed, because you didn't yet know how powerful silence could be. This is where the story begins, not with chaos, not with confrontation, but with the quiet moment after the storm, when you finally understand why successful people stay silent, and why this Machiavellian rule is the one you've been ignoring your entire life. There's a truth nobody tells you. People reveal themselves most clearly when you say nothing. Toxic people panic. Manipulators scramble. Insecure people fill the silence with excuses. But the strong, the disciplined, the self-aware, they let the silence work for them. It takes years to learn that the loudest one in the room is rarely the strongest. The strongest is the one who doesn't need to respond. The one who knows that attention is a currency, that emotional reactions are leverage, that silence is psychological armor that reveals who is trying to pull your strings. You don't learn this by being strong. You learn it by being broken, by trusting people who secretly enjoyed your confusion, by loving people who only loved the version of you they could control, by explaining yourself to people who were never listening, by trying to prove your worth to someone who benefited from watching you doubt it. And slowly, very slowly, you start to see the pattern. The attempts at mental manipulation, the guilt tactics, the emotional withdrawal used as punishment, the subtle gaslighting that made you question your own perception, the trauma bonding that made you stay even when you knew you should have walked away, the way they trained you to speak softly, apologize quickly, and silence your own instincts just to keep the peace. You weren't quiet because you were weak. You were quiet because you were conditioned. But silence changes when you reclaim it. When you decide it's no longer a cage, it's a choice. There's a version of silence that feels like suffocation, like shrinking, like disappearing into the background of your own life. But then there is the other kind, the kind successful people live in, the kind that feels like control, like strategy, like choosing peace over chaos, like knowing you no longer need validation from people who can't even validate themselves. This is where the Machiavellian rule emerges quiet, sharp, and uncomfortably honest. Power belongs to the one who speaks last, and sometimes not at all. Silence forces people to confront themselves. and most people are terrified of their own reflection. You've seen it before, the person who gets angry when you stop responding, the friend who suddenly treats your boundaries like betrayal, the partner who accuses you of being cold the moment you stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault, the coworker who spirals when you no longer feed their need for drama, the family member who resents that you're no longer playing the role they wrote for you. Your silence exposes what their noise was hiding. It reveals their motives, their insecurities, their hidden expectations, the manipulation they swore they'd never use, and the truth about why they needed you confused, emotional, and reactive, because a calm mind is impossible to control. Toxic people crave chaos because chaos keeps you predictable. Silence, however, makes you unpredictable. And in the world of dark psychology, unpredictability is power. You start to see how everything fits together, how emotional abusers depend on your explanations, how manipulators depend on your reactions, how guilt trippers depend on your need to be understood, how narcissistic people depend on your fear of being misunderstood. Silence severs those strings. It interrupts the pattern. It starves the manipulation. It breaks the trauma bond. It removes the emotional oxygen that toxic people breathe. And suddenly the room feels different. The dynamic shifts. You are no longer the one being studied. You become the one who observes. You begin to see the small details, the tightening of their jaw, the flicker in their eyes, the hesitation in their voice, the way their tone changes when they realize you're no longer under their psychological spell. Success, emotional success, mental success, life success often begins in that moment. When you learn that your calm, your composure, your silence is not weakness. It is authority over your own inner world. But the silence of a successful person is not empty. It is full of intention. It is the silence of someone who understands that reacting gives away power, that explaining drains energy, that defending yourself to the wrong person is the same as handing them the blueprint to your emotional vulnerabilities. You stop trying to change people who benefit from staying the same. You stop giving energy to people who only take. You stop chasing closure from people who never intended to give any. You stop repeating conversations that have already proven themselves useless. In the quiet, you begin to heal. You realize that the pain you felt was not weakness. It was data. Data about who you can trust. Data about who you need to walk away from. Data about your own emotional wounds and why certain patterns kept repeating. Data that teaches you how to build boundaries that don't bend every time someone raises their voice. And once you learn how to listen to yourself again, everything changes. You start to feel something you forgot you were allowed to feel, clarity. You recognize manipulation the second it touches your life. You feel the shift in a conversation when someone's words don't match their intentions. You sense emotional danger long before it arrives. You understand the red flags without arguing with yourself about them. You trust your instincts instead of silencing them. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop shrinking to keep others comfortable. You stop letting people use your kindness as leverage. And slowly, the silence that once felt like loneliness becomes your source of strength. This is the part of the story where everything becomes possible again. where you stop trying to be understood and start trying to be aligned, where you stop seeking permission and start seeking peace, where you stop surviving and start building, where you stop living reactively and start living intentionally. Successful people stay silent not because they're hiding, but because they finally understand what is worth speaking into and what is not. They understand that every word you speak shapes your life. Every reaction you give shapes your relationships. Every boundary you enforce shapes your future. Every moment of silence shapes your character. And now you begin to understand it too. You don't have to outrun your past. You don't have to prove anything to the people who hurt you. You don't have to justify your healing to those who preferred you broken. You don't need validation from those who can't validate themselves. You only need to step into the version of yourself that your silence has been trying to introduce you to. A version that trusts, a version that sees clearly, a version that doesn't chase, a version that doesn't beg. A version that doesn't crumble when someone disapproves. A version that no longer hands out access to people who haven't earned it. Your silence is becoming your strength. Your calm is becoming your clarity. Your self-respect is becoming your compass. And eventually the world will notice, not because you said something, but because you finally stopped saying the things that kept you small. This is how you protect your emotions. This is how you recognize manipulation. This is how you break the patterns that have repeated in your life for far too long. This is how you rebuild your self-worth from the inside out. This is how you rise without noise, without permission, without apology. In the end, silence isn't the absence of power. It is the birthplace of it. And when your life becomes quiet enough, you'll hear the truth you were meant to hear all along, that the loudest transformations are the ones that happen in silence.